Welcome to Boring Money, Rich Life. I'm your host, Joy Hicks, and today we're going to talk about interest rates. So, on Wednesday, the Federal Reserve, they did do a rate cut, and it has some people angry because they wanted a lower rate cut. Some people were like, okay, fine, it needed to happen. But we're going to break it down. So, this rate cut was actually the first rate cut that we've seen since Trump's second term. So, we've seen how there's been tension between Trump and Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell because Powell is definitely concerned about the economy. He's concerned about preventing a recession and things like that, whereas like Trump has definitely been pressuring him to make a rate cut. So this is the first cut that we've seen, and I'm going to break it down a little bit. So the reason why there has been concern about cutting rates so far is just because we have two major things going on. So we have slow economic growth, and then we also have really high inflation. So a few months back, I recorded a video about stagflation, and that's really the definition of stagflation. Like typically when there's concerns in the economy about prices rising and unemployment and things like that, you'll see the cost of goods go down. Right now, we're seeing some of the highest costs that we've seen in a long time. Like inflation has kind of been on the rise. Some argue since like 2020, like once we were getting like the stimulus checks, and then 2022 was kind of a high period for inflation as well. So we're not technically yet there at stagflation, but there's definitely concerns that we are at the onset of those things because we have slow economic growth and then we also have really high costs. So another thing that is really, really concerning is the fact that unemployment is also at a really high level. It's almost at like an all-time high right now. So there was a report that went out around like September 6th, and it was saying that first-time applicants for unemployment benefits rose to 263,000, which is the highest in 4 years. I have shared that I am in technology, and I have been sharing with you guys so much about layoffs. And I feel like layoffs has kind of started in 2023. And at that time, you started to see these really big tech companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta starting to lay off. And these are not small layoffs. So we've seen them lay off like 10,000 people at a time, 15,000 people at a time. And the issue is that when these employees are getting laid off, they're not necessarily able to find a job at the same salary level or even in the same field. Like, there's definitely been a lot of challenge with them not just losing their jobs, but actually replacing their jobs. And that's why we're starting to see unemployment at such a high rate. And it's really not just technology. Like, there's a lot of sectors who are not employing at the same rate that they were before. And so that is definitely contributing to these high unemployment numbers. And one of the biggest expenses for corporations is salary. So the cost of labor in the US does tend to be higher, of course, than in other countries, right? So a lot of these big corporations, they're looking at ways that they can kind of please their shareholders. And so layoffs in their eyes are a really good thing because it's cutting down their expenses. Now, the reason why that's a bad thing for the typical job worker or the labor worker is because now we have what's called artificial intelligence. We have AI. And I think a lot of people aren't necessarily seeing how AI can really be utilized. And so in technology, sometimes people don't realize like what's happening until like 20 years down the line. So like think about in the 1990s when you had the dot-com era, right? There was a lot of people who wasn't really aware of what was happening in technology, where we were moving from doing all of this business in person to them now transacting business online. And that caused a huge change in the way that we do business. Same thing with AI, except for the fact that it's replacing a lot of labor. And so what we're seeing now is that you have these corporations who are laying off, but they also don't really need to hire as many people anymore because, for one, they're trying to empower their teams by making them more efficient and making their costs cheaper so they don't have to keep hiring. And then they're also trying to see how they can kind of do away with certain departments. So it's definitely a big concern. And that was something that the Federal Reserve Chair was kind of speaking to as well, because earlier this year there was also concerns of like tariffs, and we didn't know how tariffs were going to impact the economy. So, we do still see this kind of like trade war going on right now, but overall people are still spending, they're still buying different items, they're still traveling and things like that. So the main concern that he was kind of sharing is that unemployment is really kind of like his focus right now. And then also there's a lot of concerns with like inflation as well. So on Wednesday, we did see a very small cut, and it was of 1/4%. And again, not a lot of people are kind of happy about this because, of course, like we're also in a housing crisis as well. The cost of construction is high, again, because of like inflationary prices and things like that. And then also, we have very high interest rates. People aren't selling their homes as fast as they should be. We don't have enough construction as much as we should have. So, again, a lot of people were kind of upset by this small rate cut. But again, there's just a lot that is happening in the economy. So it does kind of make sense. The feds did say that we can expect to see two more rate cuts this year. That's kind of like what they're anticipating. But there is a lot going on. And like I said, unemployment is definitely a concern just because AI is really changing the labor force. So even myself personally, like I can kind of tell that it's bad right now because I've been at my job for about 3 years now, and I asked them like potentially for a raise. Usually, if you're on your job for a certain period of time, you're doing the work consecutively, you're showing up, you're performing, then usually, yes, you would be in the running for a raise. But the rest of the world is kind of laying off. So there's a lot going on in this economy. And again, AI is really changing the labor force. So I always recommended, like, even before this rate cut, I always recommend that people at least learn how they can use AI to your benefit. Because if you can master AI and you can become more efficient and you can put it into your workflows and things like that, that makes you a way more valuable employee than, AI kind of doing the work for you. And then also too, like networking is super important right now because you want to, for one, have people in your job who are kind of like championing you when you're not there, when you're not in those rooms. And then also, if you unfortunately are laid off, it's great when you can kind of tap into a network of people who can kind of help you find a new role and things like that. So I will definitely be watching what happens to see if we do actually get these additional rate cuts because I was kind of shocked to see this one. And then the fact that it's only 1/4%, you know, it's it's not a huge rate cut, but it also does show that there is definitely concern with unemployment. So we will definitely keep watching and see what happens. But as always, what is one boring thing that you can do today to start fueling your rich life? Again, I'm your host, Joy Hicks. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.